Welcome everybody to this passionate conversation that I'm going to be having with midwife of 32 years, mostly home birth midwife of 32 years, Sheryl Sidery. I'm excited to talk to you today, Sheryl, because birth and natural birth and empowering women is one of my passions, as you know. And I was lucky enough to have Sheryl as my home birth midwife with my third child. So I have that personal connection with Sheryl, and it was just beautiful to build up that 6-month close relationship and bond with you. And then shortly after birth, and then I missed you so much. And I've talked to other women that have had you as that home birth midwife, and it's like that when you're not in contact so regularly, it's like, oh, it's just that missing having you in our lives. So it's just so nice to talk to you today about something that...
It's the mum energy thing, I think, that everyone misses.
Totally. And yeah, it was a beautiful experience in every way. But today we're going to talk about different types of birth. And you've headed up a new program at Royal Hospital for Women and their home birthing program. So I want to talk to you about that and statistics with, the direction that birth is going in the future, like where it's come from and kind of where it's going and where you think it should be going. And maybe that cascade, the cascade of intervention in hospital that we were just talking about before we started recording as well. So we might start off with your journey. So how did you get into midwifery, or how did you decide you wanted to be a midwife?
So back in the 70s, to become a midwife, you had to be a nurse first. I mean, really that's only changed about 10 years ago, where we were able to offer direct entry midwifery as a undergraduate degree. Mm-hmm. So I was working as a nurse and then had my first baby in 1980, and I definitely remember I didn't really know what a midwife was, and I remember meeting midwives when I had him, and I've talked about this before. I remember feeling that I felt like superhuman, that I'd created this baby and I was able to produce milk to keep him alive. And I remember thinking, this is a really major time in a woman's life, and the people that are caring for me aren't reflecting that back to me. Like, they didn't seem to really deeply understand how profound this transformational time in a woman's life is. And I remember in that moment feeling like I wanted to be that person to reflect that back to women. Mm. And then I had another baby, they were quite close together. So when they were 4 and 3, so back then it wasn't in university to become a midwife, it was course-based in a hospital. And that year was definitely did not meet my expectations. The midwives, so this is 1985, so 35 years ago, were very much an oppressed workforce, very much obstetric-led. Their role was obstetric handmaiden. I was just so disillusioned. And the births back there, we had a low caesarean section rate, but a very high epidural forceps rate. And I found that year incredibly traumatic. But right at the end of my training, which was like very serendipitous, I met a midwife who had just finished her training but done a 6-month an apprenticeship with a home birth midwife. I didn't even know anything about home birth. This is, back then in 85. So I remember working on an evening shift, and, I was paired up with her as a student, and I just watched her do just the simplest things, like push the bed away, put the mat on the floor, turn the lights off, put her hand on the woman's back. The room was really quiet, and this woman just gave birth in a way that I'd never seen before. Every other birth I'd seen before that, the woman was, on the bed with her legs up, all the lights on, everyone was all scrubbed. I mean, it was just, that's just what they did back then. That's what they're still doing. And this was literally just, I remember just my mind just going, kazhunk, that's how it should be. And so I was very fortunate. Shay and I to work together for the next 25 years.
Wow.
She was my mentor for a long time, and then we worked together for a very long time in a group practice. And back then I didn't need to go and work in a hospital to gain experience. So for the first 2 years of my postgraduate training was working with her and working with Maggie Leakey-Thompson, with Jane Hardwick-Collins, going to births with them, and then taking on my own clients. So I've actually never really worked in a labour ward until many, many years later. So in all those years, and then I had more children of my own, and I worked for 25 years at the birth centre at the Women's. So back in the 80s and 90s, it was a freestanding cottage in Paddington, and then it moved to the Randwick campus about 20 years ago. Things did change when we were much more autonomous when we were in Paddington. So I think I actually learnt a lot about midwifery practice working in a birth centre. And I always felt this kind of moral obligation to be able to offer women positive birth experiences in the public system as well as private. So I always did both, because whilst I think it would be amazing if every single woman could have their own midwife, it's not possible, and it's expensive. So I just felt, and Shay felt the same. We worked together at the birth centre for all those years, and it wasn't till about 8 years ago when we were trying to set up publicly funded home birth at the Women's, and I just got tired of waiting. So my youngest child then was old enough for me to do full-time private practice, because I'd never done full-time private practice. I'd only done, like maybe 10, 15 births a year whilst working 2 or 3 days at the hospital, which was still a lot, but I just wanted to experience just working full-time in private practice. And that's when I met you. So I did that for about 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And so how many home births do you reckon you've assisted with over the 35 years? 500.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing.
Probably 1,500 in a birth centre.
Wow. God, that's unbelievable, isn't it, when you think about those numbers?
Well, I'm over
the experience. What?
I'm over 60, so it all adds up.
That was actually the quote I wanted to talk to you about, was exactly what you just said, how I read in an article that it was that 1980 and most births were epidural, stirrups, episiotomies and forceps. And I remember thinking that no one understood what a huge experience both birth and mothering was. I felt quite superhuman, but no one in the system was reflecting that back to me. I realised I had found what I was here for, to show women how incredible they are.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
absolutely.
We're fighting 3,000 years of patriarchy and religion where women are, still really oppressed. And it's still reflected, in here we are in 2020, and feminism is, alive and well in our Western community, except when women get pregnant. As soon as they get pregnant, they just hand it all over to someone else. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
For the handful of women that I work with, and they are, women who choose the care that you chose are a really small minority. We're talking about less than 1% of the birthing population in this country are women that think like you do.
Well, I've had 3 different experiences as well. So it was like my first child, I wanted to have a home birth, and I was only 26. I don't even actually know how I knew I wanted this at 26, because I really didn't know that much when I think about it. But I wanted to have a home birth, and my husband at the time didn't really want to be part of the whole birthing thing. That was his background, and it was a women's thing, and I was quite happy with that because I was close to my mum, and my mum was quite happy to be part of it, but she wasn't confident in me having a home birth as my birthing partner. So I went I knew I definitely didn't want to go to a hospital. So I went to the birth centre in Perth. God, I can't remember even which hospital it was, but one of the major Perth hospitals. And it was an independent little house on the hospital grounds, but totally set up like the rooms. It was like a little hotel. So beautiful big bed, big showers, little lounge area, little courtyard. And that was an amazing, like the midwives were amazing. It was a beautiful experience. And then with Alvie, I got in, my waters broke and they didn't want me to have my waters broke for too long. So then I was induced, and that was really hard. Like that was just such a hard route in comparison. And then when I was pregnant with Lexi and I contacted you, well, I was pregnant actually, and I contacted you and you're like, I can't. And then I had a miscarriage. And then 6 weeks later I was pregnant again. And I was like, can I? And you were like, yes, I can. So it was actually...
I can't remember what was happening before. I think I might have been full for the month.
You were full. Yeah, you were full. Yeah. And then I had a miscarriage and I rang you again and you're like, is this like deja vu? Did you already contact me? And I'm like, yeah, but I had a miscarriage. So, yeah, like the birth centre in Perth particularly was great. I mean, I was at the birth centre in the hospital, and it was not not the same experience at all, even though it was a birthing suite and it was supposed to be all set up like that, but it still was like hospital. So it was totally different feeling, and highly monitored and highly technical, which is what we were just talking about.
Mm.
Yeah. So maybe that would be a good conversation to, let's talk about that the conversation of like how the training operates today and how midwives are technically extremely good, but it's that whole battle between the head and heart with midwife.
So, yeah, one of the problems that we're facing now that the midwifery it can be a postgraduate degree or an undergraduate degree. The training is fantastic. The university training is excellent. It's all focused around relationships with women and the importance of building relationships with women. So all their training, the students follow women through all throughout their 3 years. From early pregnancy right through to the postnatal period. So there is an opportunity to build those relationships, and the care is all focused around normal birth. But once they finish their training, the students then do a 1-year postgrad rotation. So they work in all different areas. So there's not an opportunity for those relationships to be built. They're just, on the ward like, any other midwife. And I just see what happens after a year of them being, in that highly stressed environment where, that's become very, very technocratic and just, I don't know, I see the same thing happen with the resident medical officers. I mean, midwives are very protective of the birth space. So this is a problem too. We don't invite doctors into the room when things are normal. Because for those of us who understand, in order for a woman to give birth normally, women need to feel safe, unobserved and private. And so to have extra people in the room can potentially affect that. So one of the things we do wrong is we keep trainee doctors out of the room, so they never actually see how women give birth normally. I mean, I can remember a handful of times saying to a woman, there is a student doctor, it's your third baby, how would you feel? And she's like, yeah, no, it's fine. He can just sit in the corner or she can sit in the corner. And they've been, they've literally been blown out of their mind. They've never seen anyone give birth normally before. But, that might be 3 births in a year. All the rest of them around, when babies don't come out normally, and that they're the births that they're involved in. So it's no surprise that they don't really trust that birth is normal either. So you can see how, we're setting doctors up to not believe that birth is normal, and then, midwives are just, there's so much monitoring and, it's all done on computer, and it's just, even the environment is not suited for women to give birth normally. Having said that, when we talk about those three vital things, safety, feeling safe, feeling unobserved, and feeling private, for some women, feeling safe is going to be having an epidural hooked up to a machine and having your baby delivered for you. For some women, that's what they expect birth to be like. And it's just weird for me because I don't really work with women like that, and I never have. So, I didn't work in a delivery suite until would have been like 10 years ago was the first time I ever worked in there. I didn't last very long, as you can imagine. It's like, what is this? Oh, man. Yeah.
So who, like World Health Organization, have a recommendation that we as a population, we shouldn't be delivering more than 50% of our babies through caesarean section?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not like that in Australia.
Yeah, well, Australia's quite high. So over 30% generally?
Yeah, over 30%, and in the private sector it's over 50%.
Wow.
So 50% of women that go to a private hospital have a caesarean section. It's hard to believe that many women's bodies don't work well.
Yes, totally. I was listening to someone speak a couple of years ago, and she was a chiropractor working in a birth suite with midwives in Geelong, and they're setting up another program. I can't remember what it was called, the Shack or something like that. And she was saying in one of the Geelong hospitals, in 1 month, in one specific month, it was 100% C-sections.
That's appalling.
Absolutely. And why is it though, Sheryl? Why is it appalling? Like to a woman who...
it isn't for some women. I mean, it's a woman's right to choose that, major abdominal surgery. What we are seeing, however, and we have just like 3,800 births a year at the hospital that I work in, and this is the same in every hospital. What we are seeing, and women aren't really told about this potential risk of repeat caesarean sections, is abnormalities of placental implantation for future pregnancies. And we have probably 2 or 3 of those a year at our hospital, and it's the same across the board. So what will happen is the caesarean section rates increase more and more and more. This happens with everything, doesn't it? A tipping point will happen and then it will swing back again. This won't happen in my lifetime, but so it's called placenta accreta, where it's a very serious complication of the placenta, and the only way to deliver the baby in the placenta is to do a hysterectomy. So we're going to see more and more of that.
Right.
Women will go, hang on a minute, maybe I shouldn't have had that first caesarean. So the first caesarean is probably in fact, in many ways, home birth should be offered to the first baby, because if you can have a normal birth the first time, your subsequent births will be normal. It's where a woman has an unnecessary caesarean section for the first that creates, more pressure for subsequent pregnancies. I don't know why in our society feminism is, women call themselves feminist in their workplace, in their love life, in their relationships. They stand up for themselves, they say no, they question things. When they get pregnant, they don't even know that they can say no to things. They just say yes to everything. They don't question things. They don't do any research. They do more research around a wedding dress than they do around their pregnancy.
That's really fascinating. I've never thought about it like that. For myself, I know there's such a shift in your own energy when you're pregnant. And I remember feeling incredibly feminine, like being pregnant, particularly, each pregnancy. And, but I've never thought about that as a pattern of being disempowered as a woman as well, which is what I kind of see that as, Do you think it's fear? What do you think it is? Do you think it's fear? I feel like there's a lot of fear of pain, and we're so used to being able to just fix pain so quick and take the pain away. Like from, my clinical practice, like fear of pain is a really big thing. Fear of being uncomfortable or a bit of discomfort is big in our society, not being able to sit with pain and discomfort.
Yeah. That is a big part of it. Not viewing the discomfort of labour as being anything other than something that can be fixed. Whereas, the women that I work with I call it, they want to embrace the sensation, not avoid it. So that women who choose the sort of care that you had, and the only women that I really work with, are fascinated by the ability of their body to do this miraculous thing. So they don't want to avoid it. They really want to dive right into it. Mm-hmm. And they don't see it as a negative experience. They see it as transformational.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can convince women of that.
Yeah, I think that, I think that's a possibly from early on in pregnancy, but possibly before pregnancy. It's like it's a real trust thing, isn't it? It's like, it's almost like, like sometimes the feminism movement is actually still a masculine movement. It's still got masculine energy. Like, it's kind of pushing, but when they actually drop into the feminism, it's like trust and love and expanding and opening, and that's how I see real feminine is in like a very whole way.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I think that's actually what's happening in the world at the moment, but that's a totally different subject.
Yeah, we could talk about that forever.
Yeah. So I think that, it's like women have tried to get equality and by using the masculine force, not by actually sitting in their full feminine of just acceptance, love, surrender, opening. And that's what you kind of take into birth, in that fullness.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't kind of expect to talk about that, but that's kind of how I see it.
Intertwined, though. And this is not
very intertwined.
That choose pain relief at all. I mean, it definitely isn't. But you can see how if a woman is cared for by someone who believes that it's not necessary to experience intense discomfort in labour, then when a woman gets to the point in labour, and all women do, where they have that crisis of confidence, and it's usually because they're quite close to giving birth, where they ask for help. If someone offers them help at that point, and help in the form of pain relief, they're going to accept it. There's no way.
Yeah.
Whereas the opposite is just offering the woman love or a deeper connection, or, more back pressure, or a change of scenery, or, more heat, less heat, leaning over, all those other
tools,
ways that, getting into the birth pool, then that doesn't last very long. And then by interfering at that point, the woman never has that opportunity to see what would have happened next, because the pain relief's offered. And it's not that women necessarily have a negative experience because they have an epidural. I'm definitely not saying that. However, there is a lost opportunity for the woman to know how strong she is, to know how powerful she is. Let's face it, for the technocratic midwife, it's easier to look after a quiet woman on a bed hooked up to a machine. I mean, I personally don't find that, but because I don't like it. I don't know how to look after anyone when they're all plugged in. But it's much harder to look after women when they're not compliant, when they're wild, when they're noisy, and they're showing their full sexual power. It's intimidating if you're not in touch with that yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of midwives don't really know how to be with women like that. And the woman who is, if we oppress her and quieten her down, she's more compliant.
Yeah. So
I think there is a link. I'm convinced that there's a link between women's sexual power and birth. I think giving birth is like the ultimate expression of feminine sexuality. Not everyone agrees with me on this part. So is hospital the right place to express that for the well woman? Probably not. I think we need to keep hospitals for women with complications. And the reality is that women are having babies when they're older, so they're not perhaps as healthy as they are in their in their 20s when they're in their 40s. For some women, not some women in their late 30s and early 40s are as healthy as they have been for years, but many women aren't.
Yeah.
So, we should perhaps just keep hospitals for those women.
Yeah, that's quite a good suggestion. And how's the program going at the Royal Hospital for Women, the home birth program through them?
Yeah. No, we've had 43 home births.
Great.
About 20 women were booked and had their babies in hospital for a variety of reasons, that most of which were legitimate. So, it's definitely a popular option. So in 2 years, we've had like nearly 70 women who've wanted to birth at home, which is amazing. I think they thought it would be about 5. So,
wow. So is it going to be, do you think it'll be a program that goes into other hospitals? Because it only serves a certain radius around, it's like a local hospital program, isn't it? So you have to be in area. And
in order to set up a publicly funded home birth program, you need a few things. You need midwives already working in group practice. In other words, they have a caseload of women that they are responsible for. They have to be, the midwives themselves need to be motivated, and you need good obstetric input. So we have all of those ingredients at the Women's.
So it's not that easy to just get into any hospital, because you kind of need people on board and you need midwives that want to be involved in the program. And
exactly. And you need upper management to be supportive, and we have all that at the Women's. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So do you feel like I mean, I'm kind of the eternal optimist, so I kind of feel like, but I've spoken to other women in the birthing area and they don't feel like it. But do you feel like it's things are improving, or more women are becoming more aware and more empowered around their birth? Like from your kind of 35 years in practice, you don't?
No.
It's on the downhill, or it's kind of evened out?
No, it's definitely not.
Not even close. Yeah. So I'm just being totally optimistic.
Yeah.
So where do you see it now? So you see it as it's a worsening problem?
But to be honest, I'm not great with big picture.
Yeah.
I have only ever really been able to work on the micro.
Yeah.
So I can just care for one woman.
Yeah.
At a time, and make a difference that way. That's about all I can really make. Because if I start thinking about big picture, I can feel
overwhelmed.
Maybe not overwhelmed, just annoyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think, well, this is one thing that I've really loved about working at the Women's offering when home birth. I would say probably 70% of women who birthed at home didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
So we wear these little badges. It just says, ask me about home birth. And so, women might be, 4 or 5 months pregnant, first baby, being looked after by a midwife, didn't really even know about natural birth, just, being cared for by a motivated midwife. The conversation would start, and you can see the women going, well, I can just be at home with my partner and you come to our house. Yes. I could just have the baby at home and then get into bed afterwards, and he can stay with me the whole time. Yes, we can do that. Oh, yeah, I want that. And then they might have the conversation around pain relief. When we say, well, you don't need it. Oh, okay. And then we talk about, water birth. I didn't even know there was such a thing. Like women's
amazing
minds are being expanded. And of course, we know that the first intervention in labour is getting into the car and going to the hospital. That's the beginning of when things, for some women, can alter the natural flow of labour. And so these women have these, unbelievably positive experiences that I know they wouldn't have had we not stayed at home.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's so great. So it's different for the women who've already done their homework. Like we've even had women who literally moved into the area in order to be able to access it. They were going to move anyway, so they thought, well, we may as well move there and have the baby through the program. Or women who've already had 2 positive experiences and it makes sense just to have the third one at home. Surprisingly, a lot of women who you'd think would be a perfect candidate for home birth are not interested at all. Mm. They go, oh, no, well, I like getting in the car and coming to the birth centre. That's where I see myself giving birth. Even women who've accidentally given birth at home with nobody with them because the baby just came out, with their subsequent birth still go, oh, no, I want to come to the hospital. I'd rather have the baby in the car than stay at home. It's like, okay, whatever. So it's definitely, it surprises me sometimes the women that do choose it and the ones that don't. But, it's not my experience, so it's entirely up to them. The other thing that's been really lovely is, for me at my age, who's at the end of her career, is seeing midwives who've only ever cared for women in the hospital setting care for women in their own homes. And because there's a complete shift in energy when it's not when you're a guest in the woman's home. So I don't know, it's just, again, they just completely
change.
Yeah, forever. And then they just want to offer it over and over again. Mm-hmm. And then there's the midwives who are highly experienced, where the woman wants to have a home birth, but the midwife won't offer it to her.
Wow.
She's not there yet. And that's fine as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And things like that will take time. Huh?
A little bit frustrating.
Oh, yeah. And so you said earlier that you feel like it'll get to a tipping point and it'll turn, but it probably won't be in your lifetime.
It won't be in my lifetime.
Yeah,
no.
Right. Okay. All right.
Mm.
Well, that's a good thing to hear from you. I was talking to someone else recently and she was saying the same, like she's been a prenatal yoga teacher for a long time, probably 40 years.
I know who you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. And she said a similar thing.
Mm.
So, yeah. Well, I think, what an amazing program to be able to offer people like just different options. It doesn't have to be, because one thing is not going to fit everyone ever. Like that's never, ever going to work anyway. So being able to offer them home birth, birth centre, hospital, planned Caesar, it's awesome.
Most hospitals in Sydney now do offer, what we call group practice, so women can be linked in with a team of midwives that look after them. But even when you look at that, so it really depends so much on what the philosophy of the midwives in the team are. Mm. So if you look at, there was a study done a while back by Sally Tracy where she looked at, if you look at the same cohort of women, so say a woman who's 30, who's well, got no risk factors, having her first baby. So depending on what care she chooses has a huge impact on the outcome of the birth. Whether you place importance on this or not is another thing, of course. You and I think there's an importance, but for many women there isn't. So if that woman was to choose private obstetrician, she has probably a 70% chance of having a caesarean. If she chooses GP shared care through a major hospital, so that is she sees the GP for most of her visits, some visits with a midwife, but she doesn't have a relationship with her. So it's 70%. The chance of her having a caesarean section is about 40%. If she goes midwifery group practice in a hospital, in a public hospital, her caesarean section chance is about 20%. So it's the same woman with no risk.
That's amazing.
If she chooses a private midwife, it's 5%.
Wow.
So
that's so important for like pregnant women to actually know that.
Most women don't know that.
Wow, I've never heard. I mean, I kind of get the gist of that, and I would know that. But in terms of numbers, that's pretty amazing.
And that was a big study. It's all done retrospectively, and then even within, so then you could have the same woman cared for in the same hospital by two different groups. So this group caesarean section rate with the same cohort of women will be 10% more than this group. This group who promote normal birth, who use water birth, natural methods of pain relief, will have a lower caesarean section rate than this group who, if the woman asks for an epidural, she'll get it.
Wow.
So whether you place importance on that, they both end up coming home with a live baby.
Yeah.
And if that's the only measure, that's the only outcome that's being measured is whether or not the baby's alive, then none of this matters.
Exactly, yeah.
Who's going to be caring for that alive baby? The mother is. And how is she?
Yeah, totally.
Never really taken into consideration.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about as well, which again, it's not, probably doesn't have the scientific backup, but this, how I think of it is, it's like you want your baby, of course, first thing is you want your baby alive. Second thing is you want your baby as healthy as possible coming out. Third thing probably is I want to make sure I'm as healthy as possible so I can care for it, because this is actually a lifetime commitment. This is a lifetime commitment of being a mother to your child. So the start of your life together, you want it to be as beautiful and healthy and glorious as possible, because this is the start of the journey.
But the baby actually has no legal rights while ever it's not born yet.
Yeah.
But you can't tell that to a woman.
No.
I actually think that measuring how the woman feels about herself while she becomes a mother is just as important, maybe not even more. So in order to...
You mean in pregnancy or just after birth?
When she becomes a mother, yeah. But it's
so when after birth, because I think of it as when she's pregnant, she's already a mother.
Well, that's important as well, yeah. But caring for the baby is, giving birth is definitely important, but I mean, looking after the baby is probably more important.
Yeah.
And so how the woman feels about herself during the experience of pregnancy and giving birth is very, very important. Oh, there she is.
Oh, that's my little one.
There's little Lex.
Well, I might wrap it up now, Sheryl, and then we can have a personal conversation. So thank you so much for having a chat to me today. And I hope that this has really helped a lot of women thinking about having babies or pregnant, because I think these bits of information are just super important for women to think about. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye, Lex.
If you loved or learnt something in this episode, share it. And don't forget to subscribe. I look forward to bringing you next week's Awakening Conversation. Have a wonderful week.